Good morning and welcome back to Composition, Advanced Composition with Professor Kent Lee. And we're going to talk about the genre analysis assignment in this session. The genre analysis essay is going to be a short essay. It's kind of like the writing process essay. The writing process essay was a relatively short essay, and it's going to count like that. Not quite as informal, but it's going to be more of a semi-formal essay. You're going to write about the writing in a particular field. So first of all, I want you to pick a particular field that you're interested in. If you're an English major gravitating towards linguistics, then it should be something manageable. Pick something you can do, where you can find some scholarly articles that you can understand. Maybe articles from a class that you're taking. So for example, it could be theoretical linguistics, but be careful, some of that might be kind of hard. Maybe more like language history, historical and comparative linguistics. Maybe language acquisition, so the field of language acquisition studies, which is pretty broad. It has kind of different research approaches in it. Phonology, phonetics, although some of those can get either pretty theoretical in phonology or pretty scientific in phonetics. Sociolinguistics, language education, that's a good one. Language education, particularly college or secondary or primary education, first, second language education. Pick something that you would be interested in and where you can find articles that you can read and understand and write about. Literature, of course, literary analysis. Pick a fairly specific field. Maybe it's poetry or modern poetry or British American poetry. Pick something in another field. If you're in international studies, okay, pick a particular area of international studies. It could be things like more economics type stuff, or some of the stuff that's more kind of qualitative and theoretical. Pick a particular area, European relations, international relations, whatever. So first, pick a particular area that you're interested in. Find a couple scholarly articles. Now for linguistics, language education, and maybe literature, I'll try to post some links on the website to maybe some journals that are kind of more accessible, they're more understandable for you. Not necessarily the high-level international journals, like this, Psychological Science. I can read it, but So, for example, things that are published in Korea. This is called English Teaching. I know the title is in Korean, but it also has an English name, English Teaching. This is published in Korea. It's not as technical or heavy. And a lot of this stuff you could probably read. So pick an article, pick a couple of articles from something like this that is of interest to you, an area that's of interest to you. And there are several articles here that have to do with college English teaching, for example. That would be cool. So pick something that you can do. English Today is another one. It's an international journal, but it's kind of more readable. For some of these, you may want to make sure you're on campus with your computer, because you might be able to access them through the university library. And if you're using Google Scholar, how I showed you before, and Google Scholar will know that you're on the campus network and will find the link to the article for you in the university library online. Because if you're not on campus, you may try to access an article and you get a paywall. It says, hey, pay money if you want access to this. But some of the journals I'll recommend to you are things that the university probably subscribes to. So professional trade journals, as well as some academic journals that are kind of more readable. They're not as heavy and hard and difficult. So I would recommend those for this assignment. So you're going to do a genre analysis assignment. First, I'm going to give you a couple of Google form assignments, shorter Google form assignments, which will help you. It will lead up to the genre analysis essay. So we'll start putting these assignments online in the assignment space in the LMS fairly soon. And then we'll get into the final project later. The final is coming up soon, I know, If you're worried about the final, don't worry. For the final, relatively easy. Take your midterm or the genre analysis essay, you revise it and add to it, and you can use that for the final. And I'll give you a couple of other options too, which will be on the class website. I'll try to put it up later this week. So you'll have several options for the final. So you've got the genre analysis paper, and then the final essay for the class. And the final essay can be a revised and expanded version of the midterm or the genre analysis essay. The genre analysis essay is to help you to find out more about how you write papers in a particular field or in a particular class. So as you look through some articles, I've got a lot of discussion questions in the book here, in this book chapter I've referred to you, the genre analysis unit. But look through a couple of articles, published articles, and just think about what things stand out to you. What things do you find interesting or most noticeable about the style and structure and technique of the writing? And again, I've got questions in the book in this chapter, the genre analysis chapter, in the PDF version of the course packet for you. I think it's chapter 9 in the current version of my course packet. Look through the various questions. There are several sections with questions to guide you. You do not and should not try to answer all of them. There are a lot. Pick the ones that you find interesting. As you look through these papers, what is interesting? What do you notice? What kind of things do you find, well, that's different. Well, that's different from what I'm used to. And why? I mean, it's probably connected to, the paradigm and the assumptions of the field, okay? They do this kind of research because that's how they think. And they write it up in a certain way. I'll go through some examples in this video. Looking at kind of lower level text features, do they use a lot of pronouns? Are there a lot of pronouns, or they keep repeating the nouns a lot? For example, how do you refer back to things? You might know that might strike you. That might be something you notice, and there are reasons. In some kinds of writings, especially more science and heavy social science stuff like psychology research, it's kind of scientific. The writing is kind of dense, and repeating the noun is maybe more understandable than using a pronoun. If it's a science paper, let's say materials engineering, you're talking about different materials. In your experiment, if you say it, what is it? The carbon, the silicon, this carbon thingy or that carbon thingy in your experiment, who knows? And so they might not use pronouns very much. Science writing is really dense because there are a lot of nouns and repeated noun phrases. Sometimes in literature you rephrase things instead of a pronoun. You want to show your command of good English writing, and sometimes you might use kind of paraphrases. So in one sentence you might say the president, and in the next sentence you might say the arrogant idiot or something. I'm thinking about my president. Okay. The buffoon. The moron, they use different nouns to refer back to the same guy. So if I'm writing about President Trump, I say President Trump, the bloviating idiot, the buffoon, the narcissist, the orange dictator, something like that. You get the idea. In literature writing about literature, you might use kind of, well, not so insulting phrases, but kind of more elaborate creative phrases sometimes, not all the time. Don't overdo it. But occasionally you might see that. Sentence style. And of course, look at more than one author. But overall, do you see longer, complex sentences? Do you see a lot of shorter, simple sentences? You probably see complex sentences or maybe really long sentences in social science writing, technical writing. Not unusual. Helps to manage the flow of a lot of information and complex ideas. Paragraph styles. In the body paragraphs, for example, do you see more like contrast or comparison types of paragraphs? examples, illustrations, definitions. A logical flow. As an exercise, maybe take a couple of sample papers that you're going to use for this assignment. Outline them. Outline at least the body paragraphs, the body sections. Write an outline. Okay, create an outline and try to observe the logical flow. How is the writer proving his or her point? And it's one in terms of the research method, like theoretical arguments, qualitative data analysis, quantitative data analysis, and using statistics to prove it. But then how do they handle that logically? Are they trying to show, okay, this experiment proves this hypothesis, and that's the best explanation? Is it the experiment proves it, or is it more of a theoretical or qualitative comparison? There are these possible explanations, but this is the best explanation that explains more and explains things better. So the kind of logic used, the overall paper structure, does it follow this kind of really scientific style, like what's here in the book, the structure of academic papers? Does it follow the scientific style? And that's maybe because it's maybe experimental or quantitative stuff that's based on the scientific method. And so that kind of very formal structure is based on the scientific method. Hypothesis, experiment, prove or disprove, discussion. Is there much of a literature review? Is there a separate section called literature review where the writer first examines past research? And how does the writer use it? It's maybe to identify a gap in the research. And I'm going to do this because other people haven't really looked at this or haven't done it very well. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do a better job. And often there they present their research question or hypothesis. Is there a research question? We kind of are curious about this. Or is it a specific hypothesis? More often if it's quantitative, it's going to be a hypothesis. What kind of support, kind of evidence do they kind of bring together to support their arguments? Maybe my findings show this and contrast with other experiments, and these experiments agree with me. Those experiments, those papers didn't agree with my findings, but here's why, I think. So maybe there's good reasons why my experiment, my hypothesis is better, even though those experiments by those other people seem to say something different. Maybe not. Or maybe there's problems with what they did in their analysis or something. The sources, the kinds of sources, how often do you see sources used? Some papers, especially some sciencey papers, that just have crammed full of a lot of sources, and others not so much. So how and why sources are used, what kind of citation system is used, things like that. And then just talking about the field and how that affects the writing, or the general type of research and how that affects the writing. Some examples. I've got a sample genre analysis paper in the book. This is some sample genre analysis paper. This example is from experimental psycholinguistics, which is what I did in my PhD work. So I wrote about that. And it begins, my genre analysis sample begins by defining the field. What is experimental psycholinguistics? That might be a good way to start defining your field. And what are the goals? What are they trying to do? Because of that, they believe, okay, experimental psycholinguists believe, like psychologists, that the mind is something you can know. You can study it using scientific methods, and we can get, closer and closer to an objective scientific understanding of the human mind and how it works. Those are general assumptions of research psychology and also in experimental psycholinguistics. I'll talk about more humanities examples in a few minutes, don't worry. So I've got a thesis here, based on these assumptions. This is the kind of, they're into quantitative research, and this paper is going to explain this is not the best thesis, but it's okay. This paper will explain the structure of academic papers and the writing process. Next, there's a background paragraph that goes more into how psycholinguists do their lab research. And then we get into the body. The research might be kind of inspired by a particular theory. One of maybe many theories out there about language acquisition or language learning or language education. And then particular factors, we believe in using scientific methods to kind of isolate different factors scientifically and study them, using quantitative analysis. And then the next paragraph, I talk about how, well, because of this, they follow the very strict, rigid structure of scientific papers, because this is all based on the scientific method. We're using kind of scientific methods to study language or the mind. Then I go into like, okay, the introduction, what do introductions do in these kinds of papers, literature reviews, the experimental section. So next there's a section describing the experiment, then a discussion section, and what do authors do with the discussion section. They're interpreting their findings and show that maybe I show my hypothesis, I've proven or provided evidence for my hypothesis. My hypothesis is correct, and it's cool and interesting for these reasons. And then I contrast and compare it to maybe work by other people and why they got different results, perhaps. And okay, there are good reasons. And not because they're stupid, it's just that they were looking at slightly different things. So they found something and I found something different because I'm looking at it in a different way, or maybe I'm looking at it using better experiments. My experiment was better, haha. It could be, so some reasons for, why there are different results out there. And, there's a summary. Talked a little bit here in this example about the writing style, how it's really dense and all that, Okay, then there would be references and such. That's one example of what you might do. Something kind of similar, if you take kind of psychology research papers, it's experimental psychology is kind of like that. There's an abstract, keywords, introduction, which kind of gets right into the issue, the problem or the issue, the question that we're interested in. And there's a literature review, and then a detailed discussion of the experiment, how they did the experiment. Why is it so detailed? Well, in science, we want to replicate research. Somebody else might want to replicate or reproduce the study. So all the details are there. If somebody wants to check the study results or do their own follow-up study. And if they get different results, we can say, well, because we use different experimental methods, maybe we got different results. They did this, we did that. Okay. So then there are results. Another experiment, same thing, detailed discussion of the second experiment. This one has 4 experiments, gosh, at least 5 experiments. Whoa, okay, it's pretty heavy. Then there is a discussion section. In this case, it's short, but often it's longer. Conclusion, and then, ooh, look at all these references. Now, this is more sciencey, so it's got a lot of references. They might not be true for you, for the stuff that you're looking at. I'm going to provide a link to this on my website. It's got some good stuff, this and similar stuff. Here is a nice article. It's on critical thinking skills and English courses in college, in Korean universities. That sounds very interesting to me. Okay, so it's kind of similar, but it's not as heavy or dense. It's easier to read. And, well, there's an introduction about the idea of critical thinking skills. And then there's a literature review. And actually, this literature review covers several different aspects because it's talking about critical thinking skills in teaching English as a second or foreign language at Korean universities. So it's kind of a complex topic. So the lit review is kind of complex and long. So the lit review is divided into several subsections. By the way, a little terminology. So here we have like introduction. So where it says introduction, that's kind of like a section header or heading of a section. Then you've got the literature review. That's another section header. And then you have subsections, and so there's the subheaders or subheadings. So we have headers and subheaders or subheadings to organize, complex stuff. So you might or might not see that in your papers. Then you've got the research methodology. They use kind of an education study. I think it's kind of quantitative. So they describe their research methods in detail, their data analysis. This could also be true for qualitative research, their empirical data and their data analysis for qualitative research. Results and discussion. So what do they find? And they discuss it. What does it mean? If you want to use this teaching method in your college classes, what does it mean? So what are implications? What are applications for? This is aimed at teachers as well as researchers. So implications for teaching things like this in a college classroom. What are implications? Okay. And there's actually quite a bit of detailed discussion. Conclusions, maybe limitations. These are limitations. These are some things we need to look at further in future research someday. All right, let's take theoretical linguistics. This is more theoretical linguistics. Some of these articles you might be able to understand, though. This is published in Korea. It's another kind of KCI, Korea Citation Index article. Or the journal is KCI, so it's published in Korea. And so for KCI journals that are published in Korea, some of them more often have articles that are written in English. So these would be good for you. So here's one about Korean phonology I'm looking at. Looks interesting. So there's a long abstract. Oh, that is a long abstract, my. Introduction, so there's not a distinct lit review. This is more theoretical and qualitative, kind of. So the introduction contains kind of lit review stuff. There's an introduction of the issue or the problem, and the lit review is not a separate section, but this is kind of lit review stuff. They briefly look at other research by other people on the same question and kind of contrast and compare it, critique it. What was good, what was bad, what are some things that are missing from this, which will justify their current research. And they get into their research and they present their data. Okay. Actually, this is a... excuse me. Here we go. So here they present a theoretical analysis. And so they got the data, kind of language data, linguistic examples, something they're trying to analyze. Then they present their theoretical analysis. And in doing this, they look at several different possibilities within the theoretical analysis. Using a particular theory about phonology, they're looking at several different possibilities, several different ways of analyzing this phenomenon. And then kind of show this is the best one. So they'll kind of look at different possibilities and say this is the best one. This best explains all of the different language examples, linguistic examples that we can find. Therefore, this is the best. Then they may talk about other applications or other questions and then a conclusion. Stuff that maybe they might want to look at further in the future. What are some implications for this, for our understanding of language structure and such? So theoretical articles and qualitative articles don't follow that rigid structure so much. It's kind of a bit more loosely organized. Literature analysis papers are kind of similar. For example, as I've read some for a few colleagues of mine back at Code. Introduction, which kind of presents a particular issue. I'm interested in this aspect about the poet's life and how her life events shaped, her poetry, particular aspects of her poetry, or maybe how she uses certain metaphors in her poetry. So it kind of just presents the issue, and it may refer to other scholars who have done work on that or similar questions, but there isn't really a lit review itself. Certainly not as a distinct section. It's kind of optional. Lit review content is kind of optional. Depends on, I guess, what you're doing, what your subject is, what your question is. So they might cite other authors, other scholars, and work they've done on the issue, or just for other reasons, I might cite other scholars who've done maybe work on maybe other related questions, but not this question. And they'll just present, okay, this is the poet's life, and these are examples of some sections from her poems, and come up with kind of an analysis of how these events in her life influenced her use of meter and metaphor in her poems. It's kind of unstructured, or much less structured compared to the more sciencey stuff, like this. There isn't a very rigid structure. You don't necessarily see a discussion section because the whole paper is kind of like a discussion section. It's a kind of a theoretical analysis. It's like, here's something I'm interested in. I'm interested in this aspect or this question. Look at some examples and some information about the poet. And these are kind of my findings, my conclusions, my ideas. This provides us another insight into the poet and her writing, or our theory of how poetry works, or something like that. So for those of you in literature, think about, why is the writer writing about this? What's the social value of this? It's not just, I think, mind games. There is value in doing that, I think. Okay, why is the writer, the scholar, writing this? Why? There's some value to it, I think. What is it? Those of you in international studies, some international studies are kind of more quantitative. They're influenced by maybe economic questions and approaches, and study of economics, and some are kind of more qualitative and theoretical, like more in the political science side. So you might see more theoretical papers. It might be kind of qualitative, empirical papers. It might be quantitative, very empirical papers. And again, just like in this discussion here, what are the reasons? Why are the papers on the topic you're looking at, why are they quantitative? Why are they more qualitative or theoretical? Why? What are the author's goals or purposes or assumptions in doing that? How does it affect the writing style and the structure of the paper? So just, what do you notice? I'm going to ask you to fill out a couple of Google Forms. And at first they're going to just ask you to pick up a couple papers and just explore some kind of exploratory questions. What field are you writing about, or particular subfield? What kind of work do people do? Why do they do it? And then you look at some papers and what are they doing and why? Just some kind of exploratory questions to help you get started on this. And then I will also give you the formal essay assignment, hopefully soon. And we'll talk a little bit about this maybe next time, especially if you have questions, put them on the LMS. And then we will also talk about some common writing style issues. Maybe I've noticed in your midterms, as well as in past semesters of other students. And then we'll launch into the professional writing unit and do that in a couple of weeks. And if you're interested in professional writing, there will be an option for that for the final also. I'll put it up on the website. So professional writing will involve things like cover letters, resumes, CVs, statement of purpose for graduate school. That might be of relevance to some of you too. So enjoy your homework, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.